listener production.
Hi, welcome to The Briefing. Sasha Barbagat with you. A live export ban on sheep passed Parliament this week, much to the celebration of animal rights groups. They've been campaigning for years against what they say is a cruel and needless practice. On the flip side of that, though, is the farming communities who rely on the trade for their livelihoods.
The government's had a lot of sound, reasoned and robust debate given to them about why it shouldn't happen, and they've completely ignored all that. It's been quite a challenge to face that kind of opposition. In
today's Deep Dive, we speak with a WA farmer who has fought against the ban to find out what's next for the industry and what they wish they could say to inner city folk who are against the practice. First, though, Bension Siebert is here for the headlines. It is Wednesday, the 3rd of July.
Morning, Sasha. Well, we start in India, where more than 100 people have been killed in a crowd crush at a religious event in Hathras, southeast of the capital, New Delhi. It happened after a satsang, a Hindu devotional event. It's not clear what caused the stampede as people tried to leave the event, but some reports say that the exit was too narrow and that a dust storm led to panic and confusion. Local police say at least 116 people were killed, many of them women and children.
Overcrowding may have been a factor, with reports that some 15,000 people were at this event, which had permission for about 5,000 people. A high-level committee has been formed to investigate the tragedy, according to officials. Unfortunately, Bension, accidents like this happen pretty regularly at religious events in India, when large numbers of people are gathering in these tight spaces with poor crowd control. And if the reports are correct that 15,000 people were at this particular event with only approval for 5,000, I mean, that sparks immediate questions for their safety. We saw in 2018 60 people killed after a train rammed into a crowd that was watching celebrations for Dussehra, which is a Hindu festival. And in 2013, there was another crush at a Hindu festival which killed 115 people. So, yes, sadly, not a new phenomenon in India.
250,000 Palestinians have been ordered to evacuate Khan Younis by the Israeli army. It's the second largest city in the Gaza Strip. People reportedly received a message on their phone to leave, causing many to flee by foot. Hospitals in the area reported not being able to cope because medical staff and patients fled the southern city, but the Israeli military reportedly said that they were not subject to an evacuation. Israeli forces claimed 20 projectiles were fired into Israel on Monday morning from the area, prompting a retaliation. Gazan health officials say 8 Palestinians were killed and dozens wounded during overnight strikes following the evacuation order.
This is an example, Bension, of the absolute horrors facing the civilian population of Gaza. So a lot of the people who are currently in Khan Younis, who are now evacuating, had moved into Khan Younis because they had been told to evacuate Rafah. Like, the Gaza Strip is so small that people are just being shunted from place to place as the IDF decides where it wants to strike and what it wants to target. So once again, people in Palestine are being forced to flee somewhere that they hoped would be safe. Manhattan prosecutors have agreed to delay Donald Trump's sentencing over his 34 felony convictions. You might remember these were related to hush money payments made to porn star Stormy Daniels to cover up a sex scandal ahead of the 2016 election. Trump was due to be sentenced next Friday our time, but yesterday's US Supreme Court decision, which gave Trump immunity for official actions he took as president, means the New York court now has to reassess if his convictions are still valid.
Now, Sasha, all of this is happening, of course, as pressure continues to mount on the US President Joe Biden to withdraw from the presidential election after that disastrous debate performance last week. Polls show Trump has increased his lead over Biden since the debate, and a CNN poll shows 3/4 of surveyed Americans believe Biden's party, the Democrats, would have a better chance at winning if they chose a different candidate.
It's interesting, Bension, to see this continued fallout from the debate. It's not surprising, but it is interesting to watch from afar here in Australia, because we're seeing this pressure just build on Biden. There's been this PR blitz of some of his most trusted advisors and senior Democrats going out into the media saying, no, Biden's not going to stand down. He is fit. He can do this job. We saw that rally performance where he was very defiant in the face of these calls for him to step down and let someone else take over. But we've had our first Democratic rep break ranks and call publicly for Biden to stand down. His name is Lloyd Doggett. He is a Democratic representative for Texas. And in a statement, he pretty much said straight up, Biden should stand aside and someone else should take over. Now CNN's saying that the White House is considering a meeting with Democratic governors on Wednesday local time. And this is after they expressed concerns about Biden's performance. So the rumours continue. I don't know if Biden can survive it. It seems like the pressure is not going away.
Absolutely. And it is probably the first time that a elected Democratic representative has come out to break ranks against Joe Biden sticking around. But the sort of entire liberal media in the US is pretty consensus on this. The New York Times put out an editorial that said, for the sake of the country, Joe Biden should step down. And it's pretty hard to see with the conversation that's happening at the moment. The conversation is not, is Donald Trump a dangerous potential authoritarian dictator type president? Do we need to be a lot more worried now that the Supreme Court has allowed anyone to do anything who's president if they're doing it with their official powers? That's really not the conversation. The conversation is Joe Biden physically capable of doing the presidency, which is just not a good space to be in when you're going into a presidential election.
There's an election on in Flinders, and I know who I will back. It's a hard-working man called Carter. Helps anyone on the track.
Yes, the man himself, Bob Katter, is going to be honoured with a portrait at Parliament House. The one-off painting has been commissioned to celebrate his 50 years across state and federal parliaments. Quite an achievement. The North Queensland MP started his career in politics in 1974 before moving into federal politics in 1993. Now, this decision to award him or to honour him with this portrait was made by a little-known committee in the Canberra bubble called the Historic Memorials Committee. The PM and the opposition leader are among those who currently sit on this committee. And Anthony Albanese, speaking on the decision to give this portrait, said, "A lot has changed over the decades in Parliament, but one constant has been Bob Katter." What do you reckon, Bension? A portrait of the cowboy hat? Well, it's not a cowboy hat, is it? It's an Akubra, the Akubra wearing Polly. Think it's a good idea?
Well, let 1,000 blossoms bloom as far as I'm concerned, but I ain't spending any time on it because in the meantime, every 3 months, a person is torn to pieces by a crocodile in North Queensland.
Oh, I hope everyone listening gets that reference. They should. It's probably his most iconic line. Speaking in the lead up to the plebiscite, he kind of was flipping all over the place. Also a really cool fact about that committee that I mentioned, it was formed in 1911. It's actually been around for a really long time.
Wow.
But I think, most people, this is the one that decides on who gets a portrait in Parliament House, which moments or events or important Australians are honoured. I thought that was just a nice little bit of trivia to take into your Wednesday. Enjoy, everyone. Hey, that is the end of headlines for today. Next up, we are looking into the live sheep export ban and what that means for farmers in WA. Live exporting of livestock in Australia has a checkered history, to say the least. Investigations into the practice have uncovered horrific stories of cruelty. Animals packed into ships like sardines, unable to eat or drink, exposed to extreme temperatures, and covered in their own excrement for weeks at sea. According to Animals Australia, 3 million animals have died in live export, and that's not to mention what happens to them once they arrive at their destination. This week, campaigners for animal rights won a years-long battle to ban the live export of sheep, with the practice to end by 2028 after it was passed in Parliament. A transition will now start to happen from sending live animals to sending refrigerated meat that will be slaughtered here to avoid long journeys and potentially cruel treatment overseas. A last-minute appeal by Keep the Sheep, which has been fighting to save the industry, failed. Someone who was there on the ground in Canberra to meet with the PM is my guest today. His name is John Hassell. He's a WA farmer and the Vice President of the National Farmers Federation. John, we appreciate you joining us on the briefing today. How disappointed are you in this decision?
Oh, look, bitterly disappointed. I think the government's had a lot of sound, reasoned and robust debate given to them about why it shouldn't happen, and they've completely ignored all that. It's been quite a challenge to face that kind of opposition.
Look, this was a 2022 election commitment from Labor. There'll be 4 years to transition to this refrigerated trade. Do you think that's enough time? And is the $107 million promised by the federal government going to be enough to support that transition?
No, the $107 million is an absolute slap in the face. You know, the industry's $143 million this year. With the multiplier effect, it's probably worth $1 billion to the economy. And they want to throw, the 40-odd million of that, 107 is going to government departments for various things. So $60 million for a $1 billion trade is a slap in the face.
What is your biggest concern about having to make the transition from live export to refrigerated trade?
Live export is something that can be flicked on and off very easily. You can't turn abattoirs on and off very quickly and easily. So there won't be the competition in the market. So the prices will be lower for sheep. Farmers won't produce quite so many sheep. So the worst part about that then is the flow-on effect to the country towns. And in my estimation, and it's not something that I do lightly, is that there'll be 30 country towns in Western Australia out of 43 local shires that will just about be wiped out.
Mm-hmm. As in the support from the industry isn't going to be there to support those towns and those communities?
Well, when you say support from industry, the employment opportunities, absolutely.
Look, I'm going to quote some figures from a group called Stop Live Exports, who I'm sure you've heard of. They claim in their numbers that almost 7 in 10 rural Australians support a ban on live sheep export. They also claim that 13,000 people are employed in the trade, but most of them will be required in this transition to refrigerated trade. If this is the case, why are WA farmers so against the move?
Well, let's go back and talk about the 70% of people who are supposedly against the trade. Now, that was push polling by the RSPCA. If you look at the polling that was done by Vaconic, which is a subsidiary of CSIRO, and the polling that's been done by Redbridge, which is a Labor Party machine, there's 70% support for it. So, fairly disingenuous polling by RSPCA and co. 13,000 people in the industry, for the number of sheep that could possibly be employed in an abattoir, maybe 300 would probably do that if it was spread over a whole year. So where are the other 12,700 going to get employed? They're going to leave town. They're not going to be employed in the local communities in which the sheep are produced. It's going to devastate rural communities, and they haven't got an answer for that, and they don't know that there's going to be an answer for it because nothing can replace this industry in exactly the same way.
Can you explain to me, for me as an inner city slicker who knows nothing about farming, like what do the jobs look like in live export? And then how might they then be used to, move into this new transitioned phase of sending refrigerated meat instead of live animals?
Well, for starters, there's only a very, very, very small proportion of those who can move from one to the other because the jobs just aren't there and won't be there. The other thing is that, there are shearers, there are contractors who do lamb marking, drenching, inoculating, so all animal health stuff. There are contractors who cart the livestock. There are stock agents, there are wool agents, and the wool is a vital part of this. Just so many different people down the line who are employed in the industry that will be, disadvantaged by this. And then, to have 300 jobs created, wowee, what an option. I think, and what it'll mean is that a lot of those people will go to the cities, put more pressure on jobs and houses down there, reduce the value of houses in towns, in country areas. There's just nothing going for it.
Mm-hmm. Can you understand why animal rights activists have fought for this?
Oh, absolutely. They saw the vision that they saw on the Awassi Express. We were all outraged by it. But the sad reality is that vision was commissioned by Animals Australia. The activist group who are supposedly doing animal welfare commissioned that footage and paid for it to be done. Now, that sickens me that we are doing this based on industrial sabotage. It sickens me. But the evidence has been given to the inquiry. It's been tabled in Parliament in Hansard on the 23rd of November 2023 by Rick Wilson. The evidence is all there, but for some reason the government doesn't want to take any notice of it.
What do you mean when you say the evidence is all there, but the government, as in evidence to say that the trade is not cruel?
No, it's to say that Animals Australia commissioned the cruelty, that the vision on the Awassi Express is what was used as the pretense to shut down this trade.
Okay, I understand. However, that's not the only example of cruelty to animals in live export. I mean, I understand that there are vets on board these ships, that there are strict regulations to try to ensure the well-being of these animals. But let's be real, you can't cram thousands of sheep onto a boat for weeks at a time and expect that their welfare is going to be well looked after, can you?
Well, absolutely I can. If you consider that when the ship goes from Somalia, for instance, they pack 120,000 sheep onto that ship, and you bring it to Australia and the maximum you're allowed to put on there is 60,000, and they've got unlimited feed, unlimited water for the entire, and more space to sit down than they need. Absolutely I can expect that. So I think your premise is absolutely wrong saying that it's cruel. I think your premise is absolutely wrong that any of this stuff that happens is done deliberately. There may have been, and I don't think there's any doubt, that there was some negligence in the industry prior to the changes that have been made in terms of the summer moratorium. But, saying cruelty implies that someone's actually gone out there and deliberately done stuff like Animals Australia did. But the industry is not inherently cruel, and I deny that is the case.
I respect that. I do understand, though, that the view of many is that there is a blind eye that is turned to what is considered normal or like just part of the trade, and that's where the cruelty lies. It's not someone purposefully trying to hurt the animals. It's just an intrinsic part of what happens on those ships.
No, well, I absolutely deny and reject that as well, because there are independent observers that go on there. They observe down to the point of counting the number of pants that sheep have per minute. Now, when you go for a walk, you may or may not realise it, but you sweat. Sheep pant in order to sweat. And, if they're really extreme, they're panting really badly, but panting is the way they cool down. That's just life. So, I don't think there's any problem with the sheep panting on a boat if it's a little bit warm. But the reality is they've got lots of space, lots of food and lots of ventilation. So there is no inherent cruelty. I deny that is the case. And so just because people keep saying it does not make it true.
I think I can probably guess, but what would you like to say to people who live in the city who have been vocal campaigners against this trade and this industry? What's your message to them?
Come down and have a look on the ship because, you are welcome.
Look, is there concern among farmers that it's only a matter of time before other live exports are banned?
Absolutely, though. The cattle industry is terribly worried now. Make no mistake, the lobster industry is worried, the racehorse industry is worried, pig industry, chickens, glyphosate. What people don't realise is that, we've got to where we are as a society based on the food production systems that we've got. Now, that doesn't mean we should have any kind of inherent cruelty, and I absolutely agree with the community on that, but we have to have these industrial systems. And, if you want to push the cost of your food up, keep making it harder for us.
John Hassell, we appreciate you taking the time to speak to us today. I understand you're busy and you're going to keep this fight up, so do keep us posted on how you go.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
That was John Hassell, President of WA Farmers and the Vice President of the National Farmers Federation. And look, just a note before we go, every 6 months there is a report that is tabled in Parliament that keeps track of livestock mortalities in live export ships. So we went back and we had a look at the total mortality rate for 2023 last year. So there were 654,416 sheep exported in 2023. And of those, 1,092 died. So that represents a total mortality rate of about 0.17%. Obviously, that sounds like a really small number, and that is something that the farmers are fighting to prove, that the actual mortalities are very low. However, it is also worth pointing out that animal rights activists think that that doesn't give you the full picture of what has happened to these animals while they've been in transit and the cruelty that they may or may not have suffered at the time that has led to their death. We also wanted to touch on claims made by John Hassell during our chat about an inquiry into footage obtained by Animals Australia showing sheep in distress on a live export cargo ship in 2017. It was this footage that eventually led to Labor's commitment to ban the practice. Animals Australia denies any wrongdoing and says it did not pay workers to film the animals. But the Australian newspaper claims to have seen a leaked statutory declaration that shows payments of up to $148,000 were made to one worker on the Awasi. A Liberal MP and Senator are currently fighting for that stat dec to be made public. And that is all we have time for on today's briefing. Thanks so much for listening. We will be back, of course, this Savo at 3 with another deep dive. And if you want to keep up with our other video content in the meantime, please do. We're on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. You can also search us up on YouTube and TikTok. Search Listener Newsroom. I'm Sasha Barbagat. Thanks so much for listening.
Listener.